Greg Rusedski just shut down the most premature debate in tennis history with one brutal word: ridiculous. The former British number one and 1997 US Open finalist didn't hold back on his podcast when addressing people who think Carlos Alcaraz should already be part of the greatest of all time conversation just because he completed the career Grand Slam at 22. "This is ridiculous in my opinion," Rusedski declared on off-court cuts. "He's won 7 majors, he's on track, but you've got to have a catalogue of work to get to 20 plus. Djokovic is on 24, Nadal is on 22 and Federer is on 20. Those are long distances." Rusedski then did the math that everyone celebrating Alcaraz's achievement conveniently ignored. He would have to win every single slam this year to get up to 10. Then it would take him at least another 2.5 years if he won every single slam. So I think it's a little premature to put Alcaraz in the GOAT debate. The timing of this reality check couldn't be more perfect, coming right after Patrick Mouratoglou sparked outrage by claiming Alcaraz and Sinner already play better tennis than the big three ever did. While Nadal, Murray, and Becker mocked Mouratoglou's take, Rusedski took a different approach. He didn't attack the claim that Alcaraz is talented. He attacked the claim that 7 Grand Slams at 22 somehow equals being in the same conversation as guys with 20 to 24 majors. And he's absolutely right. The reaction to Rusedski's comments has been mixed, which tells you everything about where tennis discourse is right now. Some fans think he's being too harsh on Alcaraz, that he should celebrate what the young Spaniard has accomplished rather than diminishing it by pointing out how far he has to go. Others think Rusedski is one of the few voices of reason in a debate that's gotten completely out of hand. But here's what's fascinating. Rusedski isn't being harsh on Alcaraz at all. He's being harsh on the people who are putting Alcaraz in an impossible position by crowning him before he's finished the race. There's a huge difference. Listen to what Rusedski actually said. He acknowledged that Alcaraz is on track. He recognized the 7 Grand Slams. He didn't question whether Alcaraz could eventually get to 20-plus majors. What he questioned is the idea that we should have this conversation now, when Alcaraz is less than a third of the way there. And he's right to question it. Because the GOAT debate isn't about potential. It's not about what someone might accomplish if everything goes perfectly for the next decade. It's about what they've actually done over the course of their entire career. Let's look at the actual numbers that Rusedski highlighted, because they're sobering. Djokovic has 24 Grand Slams. Nadal has 22. Federer has 20. Alcaraz has 7. That's not a small gap. That's not he's almost there. That's Alcaraz needing to triple his current total, just to match Federer's count. And Federer is considered the least accomplished of the big three by some measures. To reach Djokovic's 24, Alcaraz would need to win 17 more majors. 17. At his current pace of roughly 2 per year, that's 8.5 more years of sustained excellence. That's maintaining peak performance until he's 30 or 31 years old. That's avoiding serious injuries. That's staying motivated. That's continuing to evolve his game as his opponents figure him out. Is it possible? Absolutely. Alcaraz has shown nothing to suggest he can't do it. But it's far from guaranteed. And that's the point Rusedski is making. The specific math he did is particularly brutal. If Alcaraz won every single Grand Slam in 2026, all 4, he'd have 11 total. Still less than half of Djokovic's tally. And then he'd need to maintain that impossible perfection, winning all 4 majors per year, for another 2.5 years just to reach 20. Nobody wins all 4 majors every year. Not Djokovic at his peak. Not Nadal. Not Federer. The best any of them did was 3 in a calendar year, and that's happened only a handful of times in the entire Open era. So Rusedski is essentially saying, even in the most optimistic possible scenario, where Alcaraz plays flawless tennis for the next 3 years, he'd still only be at 20 Grand Slams, which would still be less than Djokovic. And that optimistic scenario is borderline impossible to achieve. That's not being negative about Alcaraz. That's being realistic about how hard it is to reach those numbers. And anyone who watched the big three grind out their careers over 15 to 20 years knows exactly how hard it was for them to get there. Rusedski then went further by defining what actually makes someone the GOAT. And this is where his argument becomes even stronger. You have to define it by something, Rusedski said. Numbers, longevity, the era you played in. So let's look at Novak Djokovic's story. And that's why I call him the GOAT. He came along when Federer and Nadal were dominating with Andy Murray. And he went through that generation and said, look, I'm going to stand up to you. I'm going to find a way. And then for a decade, He dominated the sport. The numbers don't lie. And that's why I say Djokovic is the GOAT. That's a complete definition of greatness. It's not just about winning tournaments when you're young and talented and your body is perfect. It's about doing it year after year against the best competition in the most challenging circumstances possible. It's about longevity. It's about sustaining excellence when everyone is studying you, copying you, trying to beat you. Djokovic did that. He broke into a tour dominated by two all-time greats, and not only competed with them, but eventually surpassed them. He dominated for a decade, while fighting off challenges from multiple generations of talented players. He kept winning into his late 30s when his body should have been breaking down. That's what makes someone the GOAT. Not just peak performance, but sustained peak performance over an impossibly long period of time against the best possible competition. Alcaraz hasn't done that yet. Not because he can't, but because he hasn't had time. He's 22. He's been at the elite level for maybe 3 years. The big three sustained excellence for 15 to 20 years each. Rusedski's point is that we need to see Alcaraz do it before we put him in that conversation. We need to see him handle injuries and comebacks. We need to see him evolve his game as he gets older. We need to see him stay motivated after he's won everything. We need to see him compete effectively into his 30s. We need to see him do all the things the big three did that made them truly great. And we can't see any of that yet, because it hasn't happened. That's not Alcaraz's fault. That's just time. You can't fast forward through the part where you prove yourself over a decade or more. You have to actually live through it. The comparison to the big three's eras is also crucial. Djokovic didn't just win 24 Grand Slams. He won them while competing against Federer and Nadal, two other all-time greats who were also winning everything. That's why his achievement is so impressive. He had to go through multiple all-time greats just to win tournaments. Alcaraz is competing primarily against Sinner right now. Sinner is great. He might end up being an all-time great. But he doesn't have the resume yet that Federer and Nadal had when Djokovic was beating them. So the degree of difficulty isn't quite the same. That could change. Maybe Sinner becomes an all-time great, and their rivalry defines an era. Maybe other young players emerge who become legitimate threats. But right now, Alcaraz is the clear best player on tour with one main rival. That's different from what Djokovic faced. The irony is that Rusedski is actually more optimistic about Alcaraz's ultimate potential than some of the people criticizing him. In another recent statement, Rusedski said he thinks Alcaraz can absolutely reach 20 Grand Slams if he stays healthy. I don't see there being any reason, if he stays healthy, to get to 20, Rusedski said. To get beyond 20, that is a different beast. So Rusedski believes in Alcaraz's ability to achieve historically great things. He just doesn't think we should be having the GOAT conversation when the guy is 7 out of 24 on the way to matching Djokovic's total. That's reasonable. That's logical. That's being a fan of the sport who understands how greatness is actually achieved rather than just reacting emotionally to impressive performances. The Patrick Mouratoglou controversy that Rusedski is indirectly responding to adds important context here. Mouratoglou claimed that Alcaraz and Sinner are already playing better tennis than the big three ever did. That sparked outrage from Nadal, Murray, Becker, and others who saw it as disrespectful to the greatest era in tennis history. Rusedski's response is more measured, but equally firm. He's not engaging with the, "Are they playing better tennis?" question. He's saying that regardless of how good their tennis is right now, they need to sustain it for a decade or more before we talk about them being in the GOAT conversation. That sidesteps the whole talent versus achievement debate and focuses on what actually matters for legacy. Sustained excellence over time. And that's impossible to predict or claim someone has achieved when they're only 3 years into their elite-level career. The other thing Rusedski gets right is recognizing that winning 20-plus Grand Slams is exponentially harder than winning 7. It's not a linear progression where you just keep doing what you're doing and the numbers accumulate. The challenges compound. Your body breaks down. You get injured. Opponents figure out your patterns. Younger players come along with even better training and more speed. The mental grind of being expected to win every tournament wears you down. Motivation becomes harder when you've already won everything. All of those things happened to the big three at various points. They all had injuries. They all had slumps. They all faced periods where people questioned whether they were still elite. And they all found ways to overcome those challenges and keep winning. We don't know if Alcaraz will overcome those challenges when they inevitably come. We hope he will. We think he can based on what we've seen. But we don't know. And that's why the GOAT conversation is premature. Rusedski using the word ridiculous is perfect because it captures how absurd it is to compare someone with 7 majors to people with 20 to 24. It's not just premature. It's so premature that it's silly. It's the kind of thing fans say when they're caught up in the excitement of the moment without thinking through the actual math and timeline involved. And Rusedski is doing everyone a favor by bringing the conversation back to reality. Not to diminish Alcaraz's achievements, but to protect him from the impossible burden of living up to comparisons he shouldn't be facing yet. Because here's the thing, if people keep saying Alcaraz is already in the GOAT conversation, what happens when he loses? What happens when he has an off year? What happens when he gets injured and misses tournaments? Those things will happen. They happen to everyone. And when they do, the narrative will shift from he's already one of the greatest to he's falling short of expectations. That's not fair to Alcaraz, and it's not helpful for the sport. Better to recognize what he's accomplished. Youngest career Grand Slam winner ever. 7 majors at 22. Clear best player in the world right now. While also acknowledging that he has a long way to go before we talk about him in the same breath as Djokovic, Nadal, and Federer. That's what Rusedski is doing. That's what reasonable people should be doing. Celebrate the present while being realistic about what it takes to build an all-time great legacy. The tennis world needs more voices like Rusedski's right now. People who can appreciate greatness without getting carried away. People who can provide historical context and mathematical reality checks without being dismissed as haters or old-school purists. Because the alternative is what we've been seeing. Hyperbolic claims that insult the achievements of past greats while putting unsustainable pressure on young players who haven't had time to prove themselves over the long haul. Alcaraz doesn't need to be in the GOAT debate at 22. He needs to be celebrated for being the best player in the world at 22. Those are different things. And confusing them doesn't help anyone. Rusedski gets that. He's calling it ridiculous not to tear down Alcaraz, but to tear down the ridiculous expectations and comparisons being thrust upon him. That's actually protecting Alcaraz more than praising him. And the numbers back him up completely. 7 is less than a third of 24. That's just math. And math doesn't care about excitement or potential, or how good someone looks when they're playing their best. Math is just math. Alcaraz needs 17 more Grand Slams to match Djokovic. 17. That's more than 2 entire slam counts of what he has now. That's years and years of elite performance. That's navigating injuries and slumps and new challenges and aging and everything else that comes with a long career. Can he do it? Maybe. Probably, if he stays healthy. But he hasn't done it yet. And until he does, the GOAT conversation is premature. Ridiculous, as Rusedski said. The final irony is that Alcaraz himself would probably agree with Rusedski. He's been humble and measured in his own comments about his legacy. He's focused on continuing to improve, rather than claiming he's already achieved all-time great status. I cannot compare myself to them when they were my age, Alcaraz said recently. It doesn't matter what I have achieved at this age if I stagnate here. I want to continue growing in my career and get to where Djokovic, Rafa and Federer are. That's the right attitude. That's someone who understands that the journey is long and the work is just beginning. Alcaraz isn't claiming to be in the GOAT conversation. Other people are putting him there, and Rusedski is rightly pushing back. So rather than getting defensive about Rusedski's comments, Alcaraz fans should appreciate them. Because he's protecting their favorite player from unrealistic expectations while acknowledging the incredible things he's already accomplished. 7 Grand Slams at 22 is historic. Youngest career Grand Slam winner ever is historic. Being clearly the best player in the world right now is special. Those achievements stand on their own without needing to be compared to what Djokovic, Nadal, and Federer did over entire 15 to 20-year careers. Let Alcaraz build his legacy step by step. Celebrate each achievement as it comes. And when he's 35 or 36 years old and has accumulated 20-plus majors over a decade and a half of sustained excellence, then we can have the GOAT conversation. Is Rusedski being too harsh calling the GOAT debate ridiculous? Or is he providing necessary reality check? Should we celebrate Alcaraz's potential or wait for sustained achievement before comparing him to the big 3? And can Alcaraz actually reach 20-plus Grand Slams over the next decade? Drop your take in the comments, and let's debate whether being premature with GOAT talk helps or hurts young champions. Subscribe because Alcaraz's journey to potentially joining the big 3 conversation is just beginning, and we'll cover every major step. Hit that like button if you think Rusedski is right to pump the brakes. Sometimes the truth matters more than the hype. There's a broader lesson here about how we consume and discuss sports in the modern era. Social media and 24/7 sports coverage create pressure to have hot takes and extreme opinions. Saying, Alcaraz is really good and has a bright future, doesn't generate clicks or engagement. But saying, Alcaraz is already in the GOAT conversation does. That incentive structure pushes people toward premature declarations and hyperbolic claims. And it creates a toxic environment where young athletes are either being crowned as all-time greats before they've earned it, or being torn down when they inevitably fall short of impossible expectations. Rusedski is pushing back against that entire dynamic. He's saying that we can appreciate what Alcaraz has done without needing to make it more than it is. We can recognize historic achievement without comparing it to the greatest careers ever assembled over decades of sustained excellence. That's healthy for the sport. It's healthy for Alcaraz. And it's respectful to the big three, who actually did the work of building those legendary careers, one tournament at a time over 15 to 20 years. The comparison to what Rusedski himself achieved is also instructive. He reached a US Open final. He got to world number 4. He had a solid, successful professional career. But he's not in the GOAT conversation, and never would claim to be. He knows exactly what separates very good players from all-time greats. And that perspective, that understanding of how hard it is to be truly great over a long period, informs his criticism of putting Alcaraz in the GOAT debate now. Because Rusedski competed against some of the greats. He knows what it took for them to achieve what they achieved. And he knows Alcaraz hasn't done that yet, regardless of how talented he is, or how many majors he's won at a young age. The health component that Rusedski mentioned is also crucial. If he stays healthy, is doing a lot of work in predictions about Alcaraz reaching 20 Grand Slams. Because staying healthy for 10 to 15 more years of elite tennis is far from guaranteed. Look at what happened to Andy Murray. Legitimate Big Four member, multiple major winner, seemed destined for 8 to 10 Grand Slams at least. Then hip injuries derailed his career, and he never won another major. He's still competing, but nowhere near the level that made him elite. Or consider Juan Martín del Potro. Won the 2009 US Open at 20 years old. Looked like he could win 10+ majors. Wrist and knee injuries limited him to that single major despite all his talent. Those are cautionary tales about why counting Grand Slams before they're won is problematic. Bodies break down. Injuries happen. Careers get derailed. You can't just extrapolate from current success and assume it continues indefinitely. The big three staying relatively healthy for their entire careers is actually part of what makes them exceptional. Federer played at an elite level into his late 30s with minimal injury issues until the very end. Nadal won majors despite chronic foot problems and various injuries throughout his career. Djokovic has been remarkably durable considering how physical his playing style is. Alcaraz has already had some injury scares. Nothing major yet, but enough to remind us that his body is under tremendous stress every time he competes. Will he stay healthy for another 10 to 15 years? We hope so, but it's not guaranteed. And that's another reason why the GOAT conversation is premature. Because part of being an all-time great is the durability to sustain excellence over time. We can't know if Alcaraz has that until we see him actually do it. Rusedski's comments also highlight the difference between peak performance and career achievement. Alcaraz might already be playing at a level equal to or better than the big three's peaks. His best tennis might be as good as anyone's best tennis ever. That's possible. But careers aren't measured by peaks. They're measured by sustained performance over time. By how many years you can stay at or near your peak. By how you perform when you're not at your best. By how you handle adversity and come back from setbacks. The big three excelled at all of those things for incredibly long periods. Alcaraz might too. But we can't know that until we see it happen. And until we do, comparing career achievements is meaningless. The mathematical reality Rusedski laid out is inescapable. Even if Alcaraz wins 2 Grand Slams per year for the next 8 years, which would be an incredible achievement, he'd still only have 23 majors. One less than Djokovic currently has. And that assumes Djokovic doesn't win any more, which might not be true. So realistically, if Alcaraz wants to surpass Djokovic's total, he needs to sustain elite performance for a decade or more. He needs to win Grand Slams into his early 30s. He needs to keep improving and evolving his game as he ages and his opponents get better. That's an enormous challenge. one that only a handful of players in history have met. And suggesting that Alcaraz has already done enough to be in the GOAT conversation when he's less than a third of the way to matching Djokovic's total is, as Rusedski said, ridiculous. The fact that this even needs to be said shows how much recency bias affects sports discourse. People see Alcaraz dominating now and assume it will continue forever. They forget how many talented young players have had great starts to their careers, but failed to sustain that success long enough to be considered all-time greats. Rusedski is providing historical context and mathematical reality to counter that recency bias. He's reminding people that tennis history is littered with players who had incredible potential but didn't fulfill it. And that until Alcaraz actually does what the big three did, sustain excellence for 15 to 20 years, we shouldn't be comparing him to them. That's not being negative. That's being realistic. And in an era where everyone wants to crown the next great thing before they've proven themselves, realism is valuable. The ultimate irony is that the best thing for Alcaraz's legacy is probably for people like Rusedski to keep pushing back against the premature GOAT talk. Because when Alcaraz does eventually reach 20-plus majors, if he does, the achievement will mean more if he had to overcome realistic expectations rather than just meeting hype that crowned him before he'd earned it. Expectations matter. If everyone is already calling you the GOAT at 22, where do you go from there? But if people are saying, he's great but needs to prove it over time, then you have something to work toward. You have doubters to prove wrong. You have motivation beyond just winning for yourself. So Rusedski's ridiculous comment might actually be exactly what Alcaraz needs to hear right now. Not to diminish what he's accomplished, but to remind him that the real work is just beginning. That 7 is great, but it's not 24. That being the best right now doesn't mean being the best ever. And maybe, just maybe, that kind of grounded perspective will help Alcaraz build the kind of sustained excellence that actually would put him in the GOAT conversation. Not at 22 with 7 majors, but at 35 with 20-plus majors and a decade and a half of dominance to look back on. Is Rusedski being too harsh calling the GOAT debate ridiculous, or is he providing necessary reality check? Should we celebrate Alcaraz's potential or wait for sustained achievement before comparing him to the big three? And can Alcaraz actually reach 20-plus Grand Slams over the next decade? Drop your take in the comments, and let's debate whether being premature with GOAT talk helps or hurts young champions. Subscribe because Alcaraz's journey to potentially joining the big three conversation is just beginning, and we'll cover every major step. Hit that like button if you think Rusedski is right to pump the brakes. Sometimes the truth matters more than the hype.